what we want to talk about, we want to talk about a spring. Hmm? I want to talk about a spring generally. And now you've learned the rudiment of Java, you've learned how to create a desktop application, you know about creating class, method, and constructor, inheritance, a class inherits a member and the method for the parent class, OOPL, understand that everything is an object. This is an object. An object will have method, it will have data member. Data member like the size of the screen, the color of this phone, the state of the object, and then but the function there is to power something to put it on. You understand? So every object will have it. So you always classify something as what object. Like for that board now, you can classify it as what is an object. The size of the ball, you can say the amount, you can say the date that so the radius. Yes, the radius. When was it purchased? The color. You understand? Is an object. You now create a class ball. So you give the data type. Like now, if you say price, the price now, it will be in double. You know that's some. If you now say the purchase date, that is a date. You understand? So it means that every member of object, if you are not talking about the member of object, those are the property, the definition of you understand, have one data type or the other. You get the gist. So now you learn how to create desktop. But that desktop application, we can actually create it and install it. So that process where we have a Java FF, we can create a desktop application, and our desktop application can equally communicate to network or it can run locally. Like all this one is a desktop application. All this, all this, they are desktop application that we create to install. You understand? We need to install. So what I'm going to teach you now is how do you install Java application? You can package it so that you install it. So like that your software now, that if you build it, after you build it, you package it, you can get installer, you use it to compose, you can give it to anybody, they will install. It will equally install that when they click, it will bring your UI, that login page, the stuff, you understand? But now what we want to focus is we want to focus on building web application that will run in a web browser. You know that application will not run in web browser. So which means that application that run in a web browser, several people can access it over the internet. You understand? And one of the framework that Java provided for building web application is Spring. One of the framework, the Java framework. You understand? Spring. And in the Spring, you can Spring has a lot of tools. It has a Spring Security, it has a Spring MVC, but we have Spring Boot. But you see Spring Boot, when you say Spring Security, Spring MVC, Spring uh, Cloud, different type of we have Spring MVC, we have a Spring Cloud, we have a Spring batch. You understand? We can use it to write a batch processing. When you say a batch, any process that will take longer amount of time, that you don't, if you submit a request and you don't want to wait for it to be processed, those kind of requests we call them asynchronous or batch. You understand? Or batch, you can say batch. So I we call the asynchronous request. But the process that we process, you can call that process batch process because you take time for that process to what to complete. You understand? So Spring provide a framework, Spring MVC, Spring Cloud. We have a Spring Security, Spring Security. There are a lot of them. You understand? But in MVC, we are going to start with MVC. You understand? I'm going to start with MVC. But what we want to do is before we used to create Spring project from scratch. Once you create the Spring project, you will add your configuration. You will take some time to add configuration. You understand? I mean, it will take much time to add configuration to your configuration then before you now start working. But with a Spring Boot make it easier for you so that you focus on application development. You can generate a project template online. So when you generate a project template online, uh, you can add any other stuff to it. So it will create a project structure for you so that you can start working. You don't have to care about so many configurations that you need to do. That is the essence of what? Spring Boot. So under the Spring Boot, you will learn how to create a Spring is a framework in Java, but a Spring Boot is just a subset of a Spring that provide developer with helper tools to create projects. You create and manage your project, and it enable you to focus on application logic rather than the configuration itself. It has some inbuilt configuration that comes with it that you don't have to struggle for you to use. You can use all the Spring features in Spring Boot, but it's just that if you want to add security, they already have all the security already. If you want to add MVC, it is there already. If you want to add this, it is there already. Do you get all what I'm saying? So that is just the relationship between the Spring. But all this they are modules of what? Spring. But for you to, you can create for you to be able to not care about how do I add this configuration. You know when you started uh, uh, Java FX that time, you add some dependency, you add the version, you add, but in Spring Boot, immediately you specify the version of the Spring Boot. You don't need to specify the version, it will get all those versions for you. So as we proceed, you will see it. So we want to create a Spring Boot, and when you are creating a Spring Boot, when you are creating web application, we have two types of web application. Is either you create a web service or you create a let me just call it standalone application. Now, when you say a web service, when you create this standalone, that means this standalone, let me first bring this one. When you see this standalone now, it means that like all the application you create in Java FX now, you know, you design your front end interface. You have another section within your project where you have all your view. You have another section where you have your presenter. You understand? Uh-huh. And if you want to connect to database, you connect to database, then your view, you pass data to the view, right? Uh-huh. So that is like a standalone application. You understand? It means that we call it monolithic application sometimes, but it is not really a monolithic application. So it means that together with your front end, everything will be together within the same project. Yes, but just that it's a folder you use to separate it. But when you run it, both the front end and back end will run together. Yes, you understand? Ehen. And that's how we create one. Then when we call web service, another way we create a web application is through web service. You get it? When we talk about web service, you don't provide the view. In application, we have what we call model view presenter, right? We have what we call model view presenter. Model your business, your database model and the resources. The view is it is that controller that control how you get resources from database. Then the presenter is the main one that user interacts with you, where you have your HTML, CSS stuff. You understand? Majorly, the major function of all those JavaScript, like Angular or React, is to act as what? A presenter. Yes, they no, they equally have their own internal MVC, but they will just act as what? Presenter. Do you get it? Yes, sir. They act like a presenter, like React that you want to learn now. It doesn't have a way to connect to database. You create your UI. The data that is going to come from there is coming from one backend. You understand? So that's not the web service. So the essence of the web service is to create, connect to database, create logic, and expose them as endpoint. Each of the method you export it as what? Endpoint. You now give it a URL, URI, so that that URI is what anytime, let's say your React project want to fetch data, it will send record to that URL. URL will return something in form of JSON. It is the JSON that we have to now display. You understand? But the major, so now with that with the web services where we will now be having endpoint API. You see group of the endpoint. At times we call it API, but even uh, your your method, you can call it API at times. You understand? So we can start by creating web service, or we say okay, we create what standalone application. You see all those bootstrap HTML this thing you learned, you combine that backend, you can create a complete application that will have login that instead of using React as a front end, you can actually use Java 2 as a front end. It will act as front end and back end. Or if you want it to act as back end alone, that's when we now begin to create what web service. But if you want to use it, and one of the way that Spring support both backend and front end is using Spring MVC. MVC model view controller. So model comprise of your data and your application data. You understand? The view consists of MVC. MVC. The view consists of the 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 interface where you have your HTML, CSS. Then the controller will be the one to fetch data from your model, that is database, and present it to you. You understand? So what you learn before, you learn view. You know how to create a HTML, CSS page, use of Bootstrap. That is what view. And then you've learned model. You learn how to use database. You understand? You learn how to interact with data. And the controller is you fetch data from database, but we are going to make use of all the tools that Spring Boot provided for us to be able to fetch data from database to send it and present it. Do you have any question now? So what we now do is we create a project online. If you want to create a project online, there are things we need to add to the project for us to be able to, let's say we want to create a web service. No, we want to create what? Let's start with a web service. So we are going to start with web service. But when you are creating a web service, you need to understand something. You need to understand that there is what we call method in web service. There is what we call request body. There's what we call response body. You understand? There's what we call parameter. You understand? Do you get what I'm saying? No. There is what we call we undo exception when there is error. When there is any error, there is a way you undo the error, you present it to the user. So let's say uh, we have a get method, we have a post method, we have a put method, we have delete, we have patch method. Those are the majorly used method. You see this request body represent what you are expecting from that front end. For example, let's say this is your React app. Um, let's say this is your web service app, right? For your React app to send, and there is what we call endpoint. So for your React app to be able to say, okay, I want to log in. What you design you design a form that will have a username and what and password. You understand? Hmm. So anytime you combine two or more data together, that kind of stuff you can make the request body to be a post. When you say get, anytime you want to retrieve something from server, that's when we use what get. Post, anytime you want to create something, you understand, or you want to create something from the server, that's when you what post. But if you are trying to update, we use what Let's say I want to update my profile. You create a profile update page. The method you are going to use to communicate to your web service is what? Put. But if you want to delete, I want to delete a record, I have all the list of record in a table. There is a delete button there. If I click on delete, you are going to send a delete request to what? To the web service. Do you get it? Patch. If you want to, this one put is to update every uh, object, but this patch is to update certain part of this thing. Let's say in your database, you have a student that have email, that have address. That if you want to update only email, use patch. But if you know you want to update the entire email address, phone number, this is better you use what? Put. But it's a method you can actually, but it's just a convention. Even most of the time you use post when you want to update. When you want to fetch data, at times you use post and you use get. But if your data are many, most of the time you use post. You understand? Okay. Now, for this React app to talk to this web service, this React need to understand that which endpoint are you going to send the request to. You understand? And then you need to know which method am I going to use to send the request. You understand? Which request body am I going to send? Do you get it? So, for example, now let's say login. You design a form login. You make it to be a post request. Let's say the method is post. You know, our form used to have a method, right? Post. The form itself, the form object itself used to have a attribute called form, called method. Didn't you know? If you have your HTML form, sample HTML form, this is a form. This is it. You understand? Form. If you try it here, shall you use okay? It's action. Action is the endpoint, the name of the endpoint you are going to post. If the name of the endpoint is user create, so that means your action will be what? User create. You understand? Because in your React application, you will have defined the base URL. Base URL is where the application actually resides. You understand? Base URL is where the application actually what? Resides. You see, if you click the submit button, the form data will be sent to the page. But now it will be sent to this what? Endpoint. Do you get it? Which means the React need to know the what? Endpoint. And you need to know the method. Now, here, we used to specify method, which at times we call it what? Post, or you say get, or you say delete. You understand? But this is just a form. You understand? This is just a form. But React have a way, or React Angular, this, they have a way to communicate to, instead of posting that form like this. They have framework that we can use to send message to a web service and get request back. And one of it is what we call Axios. You understand? We use Axios. We use Axios to send. There is a way we send requests. Emma from Mr. Johnson, Emma from go away from there. There is a way it is his own frame. You understand? And then what I say, you need to know the what endpoints. You need to know the method. You need to know the what request body. You understand? And you need to know if there is any error, the kind of error you are expecting from this what endpoint. Do you get it? That is just the explanation of how to communicate. Before you when you create your React app, there is you now create a documentation so that when you create a web service, you create a documentation so that anybody that want to consume it, like when they say consume, that is want to use it, like your React app want to consume it, you need to check the developer that is working on the React, you need to check the documentation so that you'll be able to see the endpoint, the method, and the request body. You get it? create a sample Spring Boot project. Tomorrow we are going to proceed. If you want to create a project, you go to start.spring.what.io. Let's say we want to create a project for a to-do list. A to-do list. This is your package, like the name of your. Let Let me say, I have a website called Ahmad Ahmad. That's your or Ahmad.com. That's the name of your website. Or Ahmad.what app. You can call the name of the app to do. So let's give it a description. Sample to do project to manage the daily activities. So we are using Spring Boot. Version of Spring Boot is what? If you are using Kotlin, if you are using Go, you use this. And we are not using Gradle, we want to use Maven. That is Maven to manage our dependencies. And I told you dependencies that time, that those third party uh, code written by somebody that you want to make available for use by another person. Those are what we call dependencies because your application depends on them. Like now we want to add one dependencies. We want to make use of MySQL, right? You need to have a driver so that the MySQL driver so that you'll be able to connect to MySQL database. You know, we have your MySQL database, you have to install your MySQL to be a separate store, but you need to be able to connect to it. You understand? You need to be able to connect to it. You need this driver. It's a dependency that enables you to work. So once you add it to the Spring Boot, it will understand that okay, you need to connect to that MySQL database. Another this thing we have is when you connect to that MySQL database, how will you interact with the database? You need what? You need the data, Spring data. You need data API. It's an ORL, object relational mapping. Object relational mapping that enable you to connect to database, to fetch data from database, or push data to database. So yes, this one is for you to be able to manipulate the data. Yes, it indirectly implements what we call Hibernate. You understand? Java persistence API. You understand? It makes use of Java persistent API and Hibernate. Hibernate enables us to connect, but we call it Spring Data. It's a combination of JPA and Hibernate. That is by the Spring. You understand? Now, I'm explaining all these dependencies to you. Now, you see this Spring Boot DevTools. Anytime you write code, like when I was working with my Python project the other time, you don't want to, if you write code, if you save, you don't want to compile the project and run again. You know, in your in your in your HTML, we have something like that. But you know, in your Java effects, you have to run again. So for it to pick the update automatically by itself and run, you use what this what Spring Boot DevTools. It's a dependency. You see, I'm explaining all these things for you now. Now, this notebook, most of the time you create your get and set. You create get, you set. But this one, when you annotate it with a data, it will generate get and set for you. You don't need to create get and set. You can actually say get this, set this when you create an object. Do you get it? Now, this Spring Web, it will enable you to be able to create a web service. It will give you control for you to be able to create what? A web service. To create endpoint. Create endpoint. You understand? When we say endpoint, so that when we are creating endpoint, you know that this one is responsible for it. Do you get it? Then what do we need again? I think those are what we need for now. We are not using time lift. If we are using time lift, that means if you want to interact with create a standalone, this time lift will enable us to manage our HTML. No, it will enable us to be able to add our HTML into that application. But since we want to create a web, a web this thing, we can go on with this. So it has inbuilt server. This Spring Web has inbuilt Apache Tomcat server. You understand? So let's use Java 11. So we can package it as what? Jar or what? We can actually change it in the application. So let's generate the project. So Spring Boot provide ability for us to be able to do it. If not of Spring Boot, you have to do all those configuration yourself. But now with the Spring Boot now, we now have a way to uh, let me call this one a Spring. With the Spring Boot now, you get understand. Yes, can you see it? Can you see it? Created the project template for us. So let's go ahead to open this project in IntelliJ. Do you understand what we are doing so far? Mhm. This is my Python. I'm teaching Space Python, so it's Python that you need to use. So, so let's put contact. So if you look at it, it will first download all the dependency. You understand? So if you look at the poem we have here, look at the project structure. We are making use of a Spring 3.0.1. You understand? Mm-hmm. That one that how to do it. Can you see it? This is just the description we gave. 17. I thought you said we want to use 11. You can change it to what? 11. So these are the this one we added to it. MySQL connector J. This is MySQL connector. This is Mongo. This is Spring test for us to be able to test. This is Spring web. This one will connect to what? Database to manipulate the data. So you get the gist now. So let me explain to you. We have generated the project. You understand? Hmm. So we are going to stop here. Tomorrow we start creating what application. But go and digest everything we learn so that watch the video so that you'll be able to come up with all